Hello, everyone. I have to say, if you've never been on a stage in a broadcast like this, it is so cool. You should try it at least once. I want to welcome our studio audience and also a warm welcome to over 2,000 people that are joining us this morning in our online broadcast. We're so happy that you're here today. Many of you have probably seen the show in the Actors Studio. Well, the Talent Studio is a takeoff on that concept. The Talent Studio is the place where we welcome you into the dialogue with thought leaders and authors in talent management. It is where we connect practical tools and ideas to help you understand how business and people work together to produce great results. Our topic today is high performance. We will be looking at what is high performance and how you can become a high-performing company or organization. My guest today is CEO of the Center for High Performance. She is the author of Contagious Success, Spreading High Performance Throughout Your Organization. This is her book, Contagious Success. Let's meet Susan Annunzio.
Our special guest star is a trusted advisor to CEOs of the world's leading companies. As an expert on strategy attainment and business transformation, she teaches a course on high-performance leadership management, the most popular executive course at the Booth School of Business. She is the author of 3 successful management and leadership books. She has been a guest on numerous television and radio programs, and she has shared her findings on high performance in the workplace at such venues as the World Economic Forum, the International Conference on Knowledge, Culture, and Change, and the Brookings Institution. Today, she is here to share her knowledge with you. Please welcome internationally recognized speaker and thought leader on high-performance business environments, Susan Annunzio.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Pamela. I'm honored to be your guest today.
I have been a fan of your work for so many years. We're going to be talking about high performance, what it is, how you can become a high-performing organization. But before we do that and get into all that detail, I am certain our audience is curious, as I am, how you got into this work. I mean, it's not like you go to college and say, when I graduate, I'm going to become a high-performance consultant.
No, it didn't turn out that way at all. My graduate degrees are in group dynamics, and I had no understanding of companies. I started my career in community and mental health and ended up as a therapist, and I hated every minute of every day. I wondered, what was I doing with my life? I was in my 20s. I didn't consider myself that functional a human being. And here I was, having people's lives and families in front of me. I would have nightmares. But somehow people thought I was good at it. I have no idea. And I had this one client who was a senior partner at Arthur Andersen. And he was on his 3rd marriage. And miraculously, probably through divine intervention, we somehow kept his marriage together. And afterwards, he came up to me and he said, I have this interesting problem at work. Just like I can't keep my wives, I have a high recidivism rate at work. I'm in charge of new recruits. They love the training, but they don't stay. He said, do you think there's any relationship? I said, yeah, you're you, duh. And he says, do you think you could come to Andersen and help me? I said, I don't know how to do that. And he said, I think you do. And so I took a chance and I tried it and I fell in love. All of a sudden, it was everything I studied in school, real. It was so exciting. It was group dynamics played out. I could have a good time. People were motivated because it was about money. People's families weren't at stake. And I began to love every minute of every day. It was one of those wonderful things where luck happens to match with opportunity.
That is a fantastic story. So many times you see the same phenomenon in many organizations, and leaders don't have the insight to say, hey, do you think it's me? Usually it's the person. They say, oh, we just didn't hire the right people and they're wrong for us, and they leave. So I think it's great that your client had the insight to say, hey, I wonder if something's going on here.
And somehow, where I feel blessed is he was able to figure out that maybe I could take this challenge, which I never would have dreamed. I never had any aspiration to go into the corporate world, and I'm grateful to him to this day for guiding me on the right path.
Oh, that is amazing. That is amazing. Let's fast forward on that path a little bit. And let's talk about the research that actually, had given birth to this book. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that just really attracted me to read more in the book was you started out saying, this is going to be the largest study of knowledge workers ever done globally, and we're going to find out if people think they work for high-performing companies or work groups. So in the study, you found out that 77% of the people work for a high-performing work group or company. But then you went back and you said, prove it. And the prove it part was, are you making more money? Or do you have more innovative products coming out of your pipeline? And when you said prove it, only 10% were able to prove that they were high-performing companies or work groups. Mm-hmm. To me, that's fascinating, the difference between those two numbers.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. I've always been a contrarian, and I like to look at that number backwards. We were incredibly lucky in our research. We had over 3,000 participants, and we had the highest paid, best educated people from the top companies in the world. And if you look at that statistic backwards, it's 90% of the highest paid, best educated people from the top companies in the world were not part of groups that consistently made money and drove innovation for their companies. What we didn't know at the time we did the research is that we really had a precursor to the fall of the economy. We thought it was a blip. We thought that, oh my God, this can't be, it's got to be turning up. But what we saw was that it was a real signal that things were getting worse, not better.
And when you found that blip, what did it show up like behaviorally as you got information from people?
Well, I think what the first thing was, why did 77% of the people think they were high performing when they couldn't prove it? And my take on that is people are working harder than they ever have before. Mm-hmm. They're working longer hours, they're trying to do more with less, but they aren't necessarily getting any farther. Productivity doesn't equal performance. What our study showed was productivity plus creativity. When people are allowed to use their brains, that equals performance.
Let's go back to that notion just a moment about productivity equaling performance. Mm-hmm. So many organizations get caught up in this cycle of activity equals results.
Right.
And what you find over time in these organizations is that the work actually becomes the 80-page deck. It becomes going to the meeting for the sake of going to the meeting.
Right.
One organization I joined a while back, I went in and I started asking people, how does what you do connect with business results? And I started getting answers like, well, I support this meeting. I go to the meeting. And I said, well, what do you do at the meeting? Well, I go. And we had all sorts of these kind of vague things about supporting teams and going to meetings. And no one could tell me what the business result was. And so I think particularly in this economy, people are scared. They're trying to look busy. They're trying to look productive. And you get this phenomenon, that you picked up in the study around, activity does get translated into results, but the results haven't been appearing.
Well, I think what we say at the Center for High Performance is that if you want return on investment, you have to get return on brain power. The highest cost on your bottom line is the cost of your employees, your human capital. Mm-hmm. To be cold for a second, you're basically paying for people's brains. And what many companies don't realize is they have a sign on the door that says, leave your brain at the door. And people say, okay, you don't want my brain? I'll bring my body. Mm-hmm. I'll do what you want. But they get punished for thinking. They get punished for challenging the status quo. They learn very quickly in an organization that the organization doesn't want different ways of doing things. If it works, if it works and it's not broken, why change it? Mm-hmm. Instead of looking at the fact that the world is changing and maybe we need some fresh ideas or some paradigm shifters.
Susan, when we met in the summer, we talked about a lot of these great ideas, and you told a wonderful story of a company that you were working with that, was caught up in some of these behaviors, like the check your brain at the door.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you could share that story with our audience and with our participants online, because I thought it was a great example of how you begin to change this behavior.
I think you're talking about the Fortune 10 company.
Absolutely.
When I had met, they had originally been #1 in their industry in the S&P. And when I met them, they were number 5 and falling fast. They were losing a lot of their top talent, and they really were at a crisis point. And the CEO had brought together 100 people globally from around the world. And basically, he started the meeting by telling people that they didn't have time to change their corporate culture, that they were running out of time, and that he needed to know what their barriers to success were. And they had a no-holds-barred discussion of what was actually getting in the way of their success. And a lot of it was form over substance. After that conversation, he put people into breakout groups and had the people in the meeting solve the problems, in other words, use their brains. And as a result of that meeting, they eliminated 456 unnecessary lines of paperwork, which anybody in the audience today who's from a big company can imagine what that means. They started the meeting with 130 global initiatives. They reduced it down to 30. As a result of having time to meet people and really talk about their challenges, they formed 3 cross-functional and cross-geographical teams, and after only 3 months brought $60 million of unexpected revenue to the bottom line, just because they asked people what was wrong and gave them a chance to fix it.
That's an amazing story. That is an amazing story. There's so much opportunity once you start down that path to really impact business results.
Absolutely.
You know, in your book, you talk about the negative behaviors that kind of hold a negative pattern in place in an organization. And my favorites, I have to tell you, because I've actually seen this in organizations. The first one is the gotcha game. Mm-hmm. The second one is having the meeting after the meeting. I can't tell you how many meetings after the meetings I've been to in my career, but they're always more interesting than the meeting itself.
Exactly. Well, Pamela, what happens at the meeting after the meeting?
People tell the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, people tell the truth.
And if there's nothing sadder in corporate America today, it's the fact that the real business issues get talked about after the meeting where nothing can happen, because people are afraid to speak the truth in the real meeting. And that's a sad thing. I say to leaders, one of your jobs is to have the meeting after the meeting in the meeting. And to assume that if you're a leader today, that maybe you're even a good leader. The press is filled with things that tell people that leaders are greedy, that they're out to get their employees. So people come to work afraid. They're afraid of saying the wrong thing. They're afraid of the next layoff. And so as a leader, your job is to know what people are saying in the hallway and to start your meeting by speaking what I call the unspeakable, the things people think you're clueless about. That meeting that I told you about earlier, that CEO started the meeting by saying, I know what all of you are thinking. I know that you think I'm the wrong man for the job. You think I'm out of touch. You think I've lost my passion. You think I don't care. So he brought the hallway conversation into the room. And by doing that, people really talked about what the real problems were and they could tackle them.
That is so great that he was able to name those things.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, we've talked a little bit about the negative patterns. Let's move on now and let's talk about what high-performing organizations have in common and what they do.
Well, the #1 difference of high performance around the world by an unprecedented margin, a 2.0 on a 10-point scale, was the very simple truth that people felt valued. And we talked to 600 people by telephone and we asked them, what does that mean? My boss tells me what to do, not how to do it. My boss cares about what I think. My boss encourages debate. One of my favorite stories in Contagious Success, and one of my personal heroes, is a man named Bobby Souls. Bobby Souls ran the most successful business unit in all of SBC Communication. But when he took the job, it was the least successful business unit. And within 18 months, it went from the lowest performing business unit to the highest performing business unit. I like Bobby so much that when I used to teach MBA students, I would pay for Bobby to come to my class. And he'd tell the following story. He said, I brought everybody into a room, and he said, you know, I think they must want to get rid of me. That's why they gave me this job. And he looked at people and he said, what's wrong? And he goes, they told me. And I got myself this big old whiteboard, and I wrote down what was wrong. And he says to the people, well, if those are the problems, what are the fixes? And he looks at my MBA students and he said, and they told me. And he said, well, if we do solve those problems with these fixes, will we make this number? And he goes, yeah. They go, yeah, we'll make that number. And he says, what if we want to make this number instead of that number? What do we got to do? And of course, the answer is, they told me. Yeah. Well, Bobby ends the story by saying, I told my people that if we could get this number, I'm going to take all of you out for barbecue. Well, one of my MBA students says, well, I don't know about you, Bobby, but at our company, we don't have budget for that. And Bobby looks at him and he says, well, down south, barbecue's only $5 a head. You know, and he goes from the lowest performing business unit to the highest performing business unit in 18 months.
But you know, that question about we don't have budget for that, I love the story in the book where it talks about that in order to cut costs, a company took the ramen noodles out of the kitchen. So the ramen noodles were there in case people were working late and they needed something to eat. And I think ramen noodles are what, 30 cents?
Yeah.
40 cents maybe? So in order to achieve a cost savings goal, they took the ramen noodles out of the kitchen.
Yeah, that's really sad. I believe that in order to be competitive today, you have to be operationally efficient. Companies have to look at what it costs to run their businesses. But they have to understand that there's a huge difference between cutting muscle and cutting fat. What are the things that drive motivation, that drive success? For example, in the study, people would say, well, our group used to be high performing, and then they cut our budget, cut our resources, and raised our target, and we couldn't keep it up. Companies really have to ask themselves, are we becoming operationally efficient, or are we cutting our way to death instead of success?
I'm wondering if people in our audience have had that experience where you were part of a high-performing team and then you lose the resources and all of a sudden the performance declines.
You know, and then people start working harder, they get more disgruntled, there's more meetings after the meetings, and what does it really produce?
A downward spiral.
Yeah.
A downward spiral. You know, you mentioned in the study overwhelmingly valuing people was the number one thing that you can do to begin to become a high-performance organization. You also mentioned optimizing critical thinking and seizing opportunity, also demonstrated by the story at SBC. Can you talk for a moment about how to optimize critical thinking and apply that to seizing opportunities?
Well, you know, when you hear the words optimizing critical thinking, most people think, well, you've hired smarter people, or we give people training in critical thinking. What we found out, what causes people to think better, is a congruent environment where actions and words match, where leaders lead by example, where the values in the company are actually lived, not just plaques on the wall. In our interviews, people said, at our company, we use our values to drive business decisions. So when people are in an environment where they feel that what the leader says is what the leader really wants them to do, they're able to think better because they're not confused and they don't spend all of their time guessing.
You know, the environment is so powerful to creating the culture necessary to drive high performance. You know, in talent management, people are concerned about retention today. They're concerned about, if I go out and hire the best and brightest talent, will they stay at my company? And there have been studies, oh, absolutely, absolutely. And there have been studies that have been done year after year that show us that 65% of the people that come in from the outside end up not staying with your company in the first year. And, you know, companies have all sorts of reasons for that. They're not a fit, you know, they don't understand the culture and so forth. But what I think people will say that leave those organizations was, it's not the company I thought it was, the environment wasn't conducive to my success. And ultimately, I didn't think I was going to be able to make progress there. So talking about the power of environment, if you have a negative culture, how do you begin to change a negative culture?
Well, first of all, I think, as you put in your remarks, the environment is very powerful. I'd like to ask the audience a question for a second. How many people in the audience have worked in one work group where you went to work every day and you did your very, very best job and you loved going to work? How many have had that experience? Okay. How many of you had the opposite experience where you didn't like going to work every day, you felt thwarted, you felt like you were stifled, and even though you're a high potential high performer, because I'm going to assume you're high potential high performers or you wouldn't have come today, no matter how hard you tried, you really felt stifled. How many of you have had that experience? Pamela, what do you notice?
It's the same people?
Yeah. We spend so much time recruiting the best and brightest people. We spend so much money trying to bring talent into our organization, but we spend very little time looking at what we call the hole in the middle. What is the environment those people are going to go into? Because that environment is bigger than personality. That environment is either going to suck out your brain power or it's going to say, leave your brain at the door. If you want return on investment, it's really important to understand, does that environment create an atmosphere where people are allowed to think? Because if it doesn't matter how smart they are. In fact, the smarter they are, the less they're able to think, the lower the likelihood they're going to stay long term. Or they're going to be very disgruntled, and their goal every day is, how can I do the least possible to get through the job with pleasing my boss and not getting laid off. And that's the saddest thing that's happening in business today. People's motivation is to not get caught doing anything right, not get caught doing anything wrong, instead of getting caught doing something right.
You know, you talk about in the book high performers and kind of what's the combination that makes someone a high performer. And you talk about it's results plus attitude. And what attracts people to an organization is passion, energy, and attitude. And you tell a story about the early days of Amazon.
Oh, God, yeah. Amazon, when it first started, that place was alive. They paid below market and got kids from the best schools, Harvard, Stanford, University of Chicago, you name it. Everybody wanted to be there because they believed they were creating the ultimate customer experience. They wanted to be at a place where it hadn't been done before. The energy there was so alive. People were invited to bring their brains to the door, and it absolutely paid off. When I met them, they still weren't making a profit, but they were already the 55th most recognizable brand in the world.
That's incredible.
And people, you know, you want to recruit the best and the brightest. High-performing environments are talent magnets. People tell their friends, God, we're having a cool time here. You got to work here. Come join us. Or in a company, our group is doing these exciting things. My boss is terrific. My boss wants to know what I think. And they say, come on, try to get a job in our group. Your best salespeople for your company are your employees. And if they're having a positive experience, they're going to tell their friends. They're going to tell their alumni network. And in today's world, in the social age, they have a negative experience. You're an MBA at the University of Chicago, and a company promises you something and doesn't deliver. That whole alumni network knows in a second what's going on. Good luck coming to recruit if they have that kind of experience.
That leads us to a really great point, which is attracting talent in this marketplace and looking at talent across multiple generations. You know, this is the first time in at least my working career that we have 4 generations in the workforce.
Absolutely.
We have traditionalists, we have boomers, we have Gen X, we have Gen Y, and now we have millennials coming in. And my guess is that each generation wants something different.
Yeah, each generation has a different expectation. The traditionalists want loyalty. The boomers were, unfortunately and fortunately, the competitive generation, you know, and our kids, the Generation X and Y, they're the inner-directed, self-directed generation. They had working mothers. They learned how to take care of ourselves. And the millennials, they want it now. And those are very, very different expectations, all happening simultaneously at the same time.
And so with that, as you talk about, how do you become high performing, you talk about the foundation and building the right foundation. What are you talking about when you talk about the foundation? Because you talk about the foundation for employer of choice.
Well, when we first started our research, we looked at what were the best practices of high-performing groups around the world. We looked at what were their highest scores. And they were predictable. They had a strategy, they stuck to it, they measured it, they executed it, and they hired the best. But what was interesting, when we looked at high-performing groups against non-performing groups, in other words, what happened in high-performing groups that didn't happen in non-performing groups, we found out that those things were the foundation. They were necessary. You have to have a strategy, you have to execute it, and you have to have good people. But those things alone did not drive performance. What you had to have was an environment where talent could thrive.
Well, at Taleo, we believe in the right foundation as well. And we believe that with the right talent management infrastructure supporting high performance,
Absolutely.
you can really drive business performance.
Absolutely. It is necessary to have the best talent, but not sufficient to drive high performance.
Yes, yes. So Susan, one of the things I think all of the companies joining us today are thinking about is, so how do I get a lift in my performance? How do I survive this economic uncertainty? And how do I really drive results and revenue? And one of the things I thought just really gave a great example in your book that every organization can do is you talk about the movable middle.
Okay.
There is a middle in every organization.
Right.
And the middle is doing fine. They're doing okay. But if you move the middle just slightly, the business results are incredible.
Right.
So could you share with us, how do you move the middle?
All right, well, what we talk about when we talk about the middle is we mean those work groups that have inconsistent performance. That means each year, one year they do really, really well, another year they go down, and their performance looks more like a crooked line. What moving the middle in the book is that find your high-performing work groups, those groups that you depend on to make your money. Get representatives from the high-performing groups and representatives from the middle groups, those that have similar goals or similar customers, and tell them that their job is to improve the performance of both groups, that they work for the company, not for their work group. Assign them a senior leader who's there to support them with resources or just backup. And get them to work together to share best practices, to share secrets. And you'd be amazed that if we didn't just subtract our low-performing groups, but we tried to multiply by combining the best practices with high-performing groups with middle-performing groups, you can catapult performance.
That's really great, because we all have parts of our organizations that are the middle.
Yes.
And focusing there can really lift overall performance. I'm wondering if you could give our audience some advice, 1, 2, 3 things they can start doing tomorrow to set them on the path toward high performance.
Well, my first piece of advice would be to start at the top. Whether you're part of the C-suite or part of a team that runs a functional group or a business unit, your organization can't be higher performing than the team that runs it. Does your team, your leadership team, emulate high performance? One of the things we found in the study was that one of the differentiators between high and low performance is that the leader protected the group from company interference. Now, I sit in rooms with CEOs and their direct reports all the time, and I have never met the group who's sitting around saying, gee, how can we create policies and procedures that get in the way of our best groups from being high performing? It's not being done on purpose. So I think it's important for the people who run a company or who run a division in a company to say, is our team a high-performing team? Do we emulate the findings of the study? And consequently, is our behavior spreading health or disease throughout our organization? That would be my first tip.
That's great, Susan. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. I want to open up to the audience now for questions.
Okay.
And also, you can ask us questions online and send those in, and we'll get to your questions. Are there any questions in the audience? Over here.
My name is Mitch Weisberg, and I enjoyed this immensely.
Thank you.
I'm a practicing physician that equates health with performance, so
Yes.
I'm learning quite a bit.
Well, then you'll like the analogies I make in the book to the human body.
And I also like it's interesting that you come from somewhat of a healthcare background too, and stumble upon this, so that's interesting. And my question is this, and do you find in the high performance companies where thinking is the primary commodity, that they are also supporting that with behavioral health and other sorts of programs that, you know, as far as their healthcare coverage or on-site programs for behavioral health?
Absolutely. The Fortune's companies that make the top 10 list look at in the employee population holistically. They not only take care of their physical health and the health of their corporation, they also take care of their need for purpose. Most really good companies allow their employees to do something that in the not-for-profit world. Either they're a purpose-driven organization and people work there because they're a purpose-driven organization, or one of my favorite companies is NetApp, who was Fortune's #1 company to work for in 2009. Employees there get to take 2 weeks off a year that are not part of their vacation, where they can go to any socially conscious or responsible activity they want to do. So yes, the best companies look at their employees holistically. That's my experience.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for your question.
Do we have another question in the audience? Yes, down here in front. Yes, you
Hi.
can stand if you'd like.
Okay. Let me get organized. Hi, I'm Gail Schoenbeck from Lee Hecht Harrison, and what I do for a living is work with folks who are in transition. So in my job search work team, I definitely set an environment for people to do high performance and create results for themselves.
Great.
Got me thinking a little bit here when you said you were a therapist and things like that. I was a psych undergrad, and I do a lot of one-on-one work as well, and I started thinking, how can I apply this to people to catch them immediately to be a high performance? I'd like to see what you have to say in that regard.
Okay, high-performing individuals have certain characteristics, and one of them, and most importantly, is their attitude. Their attitude is high performers never have, never will work for money. That doesn't mean they don't want to be paid, but money is a report card on the organization. Are you paying me enough for the work that I'm doing? High performers work for the thrill of getting results. They do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. They follow company policies and procedures when they can. They invented the phrase, beg forgiveness, don't ask permission. They're inner-directed. They're people who are self-motivated and self-directed. And they see where the world is heading often before their bosses. And the most frustrating thing about being a high performer is that when you see the world changing, nobody wants to listen to you. If I could give you one big piece of advice, is the next time somebody comes to you with that strange or weird idea that really looks stupid, ask yourself, what's smart about that dumb idea? Is that person stupid, or does their brain work in a way that my brain is not capable of? Because paradigm shifters in organizations see where the world is going, and it's really lonely to be a paradigm shifter. And your top 20, I call them the top 20, your high performers see where the world is going, and they need a voice. And the best organizations give them a voice. Thank you, Gail. I appreciate the question.
Any more questions in the audience? Yes.
My name's Robert Fries, and I implement
Oh.
strategy. And,
Yeah, I know you. Thank you for
was
coming.
a child and family therapist and hated
Yeah,
it as
yeah,
well.
yeah, I know your name.
It's kind of, if you've done the job.
But I'm not
you've
really,
hated it.
on record, I was a really bad therapist. Now that I know what really good therapists are, I know that I sucked. I told people what to do. And I was 20-something. I was so audacious, it was ridiculous. But people like you are really good. I was not. I'm good at what I do now, but I was not good at that.
You obviously don't know me. I'm so type A.
Your reputation precedes you.
What percent of HR departments in companies do you find really understand the difference between managing human capital and managing compliance?
And managing what?
Just day-to-day compliance HR issues.
Well, that's hard. I don't want to offend any of the HR people in the room because, again, I assume that since you're here, you're somebody who gets it already. But sadly, my experience is that most HR people manage compliance and are keepers of the past. And that's sad to me. I think the number one responsibility of an HR person is to understand what are the behaviors our organization needs to execute our strategy. And that HR person should be the champion of those behaviors. And they need to be the conscience to the CEO and their team. Is that team emulating the behaviors that drive high performance? Are they unintentionally, because that's my experience, unintentionally and inadvertently rewarding behaviors that don't drive success? So sadly, my answer is mostly compliance. I try to sell to the C-suite because my experience is most CEOs that want great companies are intuitive leaders. That means they just get it. Somehow deep in their core, they just understand it. And I believe if you are an intuitive leader, you are somebody who just gets it, you need to be consciously aware of what you're doing right. Being intuitive is good, but it's not great. If you want to be great, you've got to be consciously aware of what you're doing right and do more of it and make sure you're rewarding it in your workforce. Thank you for that question, Robert.
Now, as we've been talking together, we've had dozens of questions come in from our online audience, and I want to take some time to just answer a few of them. So the first question is, you mentioned having the right foundation. What are the elements for a great foundation for talent management? Well, at Taleo, and by the way, that's a legitimate question. It wasn't one of the plant questions because my answer is going to be about Taleo. At Taleo, it's about talent intelligence, and it's about understanding your talent from the time that you recruit them to the time that they retire. So what's a great foundation? It's all about, do you have a process and system to recruit the best talent? Are you part of social networking, a way to find talent? Retention, people talk about retention strategy. Retention strategy starts at recruiting. So once you've recruited the person, it's all about the experience of them coming in the door. We have onboarding. And then in onboarding, it's the perfect time to talk about goals and performance. And I tell you, people make, there's all sorts of studies being done about, how long when someone comes to an organization will they stay with you. Tammy Erickson did a study in 2009 asking people, she asked multiple generations, when you join a company, how soon are you thinking about leaving? And how long do you think about staying with the company? And in her study, people responded by saying that I make my decision on the first day of work by lunch. And you think, oh my God, that's not possible. That's got to be some exaggerated result. Well, it's not that they leave after lunch and don't come back. It's that they're already thinking about, do I fit? Does this make sense? Is this a great place for me? So onboarding, connecting it with performance so people know what's expected of them at work. So people can align their work with the larger business goals that you're trying to drive in the marketplace. And then looking at, do you have the right people in the right places? Do you have robust talent pools? That's about succession and career planning. And then looking at learning. You know, do you have development plans? Are those development plans robust? Are they engaging your employees? And then looking at compensation, how are you rewarding people? Do you have the analytics to understand what's going on in your organization? All of those are really essential for a great talent management foundation.
But also, I want to add, and I think if there's any lesson from the fall of the economy, is that our society has become less value-driven. What are the values of your organization? Are you hiring people to make sure that they live values every day? It's really sad when you think about Bear Stearns, Merrill Lynch, Royal Bank of Scotland, that they were so driven by greed that when people came to them and said, can people actually pay back these mortgages? At AIG, Joe Cassano, the man who was accredited for killing the economy, was giving AAA bond ratings to bundled mortgages of subprime by the end. He had young talent coming up to him and saying, this isn't right, it's not going to work. And he said to them, have you checked out your bonus? I think our society has spent too long confusing what's legal from what's moral and decent. And if you're recruiting talent, what kind of value-driven organization do you want to be? And has that person had a track record of living their values? You know, as a leader, as Pamela was saying, maybe they know right away if they fit, you do too. And the best organizations do two things. They keep a really good talent a very long time, and when somebody doesn't fit culturally or because of values, they have a very short tenure because it doesn't work. And we do it because we want to be nice. We've given somebody a job and they've been looking, and the nice thing to do is to give them chance after chance. But nice isn't kind. Kind is giving someone an opportunity to be successful. And if you know that person's values or culture doesn't fit your organization, no matter how hard they try, they're not going to fit.
Susan, we have another question from our online audience. It says the current economy is causing organizations to move to a mindset of takeaways from their employees. How do you navigate the short term to keep your eye on the high performance prize? I think people are feeling a lot of pressure to cut costs right now.
Exactly. I don't know who made the investment community in charge of the world because they're doing a really bad job. I mean, companies today are driven by quarterly results, and my favorite line is, I'm really glad Tom Edison didn't work for a publicly traded company in corporate America today because it took 1,000 tries to create the light bulb. Again, as I said earlier, companies need to differentiate what's the difference between muscle and fat. One of my heroes is John Brown, the former CEO of BP. In the mid-90s, John Brown, little guy, I mean, I'm a short person and he's shorter than I am. He went to the investment community and he said, we're going to lose money before we make money. The world is going green and it's technology driven, and BP is not a technology company and we're not a green company, and we're going to do that. 5 years later, BP bought, it was a takeover, Amoco Oil Company, because he had the courage to go to the investment community and say, we're going to lose money before we make money. Next question.
Any more questions from the audience? Yes, second row here.
Morning, Susan. My name is Tony Krippis.
Tony?
Yes.
Hi, Tony.
Excellent job, by the way, both of you.
Thank you.
I'm on the other side of the spectrum. So I have a large consulting group called Associated Business Consultants. I strategize with many senior people, like we have all gone through the CEO we call Psycho Group.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Skinner and I are very good friends with McDonald's, so he loves when I do this.
Okay.
My problem is this. We always talk about, you know, the top of the branch, the top performers. Okay, then what's the problem? We have a problem in what I call recruiting. How do we really recruit talent today? because we're all stuck with all these applicant tracking systems, which we use, of course, at McDonald's. It's a great program, but are we really recruiting talent, or are we recruiting people today that now have become the keyword search people? Because that's how you play the game.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point, because I think the advantage of the keyword search is that you get people who have the right experience and the right expertise. But sometimes somebody's personality is bigger than their experience and their expertise. I agree with Jim Collins, who says that you've got to get the right people on the bus. And he says that any smart person can learn content, but you can't change somebody's attitude or the way they're driven. And so I think it's really important for companies to expand their mindset to maybe somebody whose career, like mine, has been a crooked path, might be someone who's just a little bit more interesting, might be somebody who knows how to take a risk, might be somebody who's a little bit more creative or critical thinker. And I think it's important that we try to not be so careful that we have to fill boxes, instead of really think about, does this person have the right stuff to do the job, and will they fit in our culture? One of my favorite stories in the book is a company called Macquarie Capital. The CEO of that company is Don Suter, who grew up in the investment banking world. And he quit investment banking because he didn't want to make a deal with his wife that he would miss every birthday party and holiday and get filthy rich. And he decided that he could build a different kind of investment banking group, where you didn't eat what you killed, where everybody worked together, that they had to share leads, they had to share ideas, and he had what he called a no a-hole rule. And at first, he only hired what he called A players. But what he realized is that after a year of having this community and this collaborative and cooperative environment, he could bring in B players, and B players quickly became A players because the environment was such high energy. In the investment banking world, you count your revenues by revenues per partner. Macquarie Capital, and I think it's now called M3P, they changed their name, makes more revenues per partner than any of the branded name companies, because he wanted to build a different kind of company where people shared, got along, and made their birthday parties. I mean, that sounds funny, but if somebody's at their place on a weekend, Don Suter sends them an email or calls them up and asks them why they have to be away from their kids.
That's great.
Yeah. I hope that answers your question, Tony. Good. Okay.
Well, Susan,
Afterwards.
as you know, if you've watched the Actors Studio, that James Lipton always asks the guest 10 questions at the end. Now, I have actually taken out the racy questions.
Oh, yeah, I know, because
some
he
of the
has some questions
if you've
I don't
seen
want
the
to.
show,
Yeah, I've
some
seen
of the
the show.
questions that you hear him ask actors, I'm not going to ask you those, but I do have 10 great questions for
Okay.
you. So the first question is, what's your favorite word?
Favorite word. I guess my favorite word would be a French word. I'm a very sensual person, and I love the word extraordinaire, the way they say it in Paris, extraordinaire, and they say it with their hands, and they roll their tongue, and you just kind of, you feel what it means. So I guess that would be my favorite
I
word
love
if I
it.
had to pick one. Extraordinaire.
My second question is, what quality do you value most in your friends?
Honesty.
And who would you most like to have dinner with?
Oh, wow. Abe Lincoln. I would really like to meet Abe Lincoln. I think that would be fascinating.
Now, Susan, if the fire alarm went off in your home and you had 30 seconds to figure out what to take with you, what would you save?
Whew. Well, my children are grown and they don't live with me. So assuming my kids aren't in the house, because definitely I'd make sure my kids were what I took first. I have a 200-year-old statue of the Blessed Virgin in my bedroom that was from Vietnam, a church in Vietnam that had been demolished. And it's beautiful and it's old and the paint is chipping, and I absolutely treasure this statue, and I would take Mary with me.
Oh, that's great. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
I wanted to be a pediatrician, but I grew up when girls weren't encouraged to go into science and math.
Do you have a favorite movie?
Well, I guess my favorite serious movie would be the original 12 Angry Men. But if I had to pick a chick flick, it would definitely be When Harry Met Sally.
Oh, that's very cool. If you were an animal, what kind of animal would you be?
Oh, that one's easy. I'd be a Siamese cat.
And what is the best decision you've ever made?
Oh, to have my kids.
And what's the decision that you most regret? Now, you can't say to have my kids.
No, and it wouldn't be. It definitely is the best. And what's wonderful is as they get older, it gets better and better. Regret? Well, that's kind of hard because that's personal. But I guess I would say what I regret and I'm proud of is that I'm too trusting.
What inspires you?
What inspires me is I believe we're all imperfect human beings. I've had the privilege of working with great leaders all over the world. And what they have in common is that they're imperfect. And what inspires me is imperfect human beings trying to be the best imperfect person they can be.
Susan, I want to thank you so much for being on our show today.
Thank you.
And for sharing your wisdom and expertise with us.
Well, thank you. And I end everything I do with a ritual. And my ritual is that I would like to thank the people who did the research. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I could do a research study that was presented at the World Economic Forum. And I want to thank Sasha Song, who now lives in Boston, who was the project manager. I get credit for running the research, but Sasha really did run the research. To John Ross and Richard Day of Richard Day Research, who kept my Italian personality out of it and made sure it was not non-biased. To George Hoganson, who came up with so many kernels. We had millions of points of data, and he was one of the persons who uncovered some of the real nuggets. And I think, is Sharon McGowan here? Sharon McGowan was going to try to be here today. She's probably listening online. Sharon penned, I am the author of Contagious Success, but Sharon McGowan actually wrote Contagious Success. And I've worked with Sharon for 20 years, and Sharon keeps me honest. I'm a highly conceptual human being, and she makes me have to make sense. She makes me connect the dots, and I love Sharon. She's a great friend and a great collaborator, and I want to thank my team, because without that high-performing team that I was privileged to lead, we would not be able to have proven what everybody in this room knows, that if you want to make money that lasts, you better look at how you treat human beings, because your biggest resource is the talent you bring into your company. Thank you very much for coming today.
Susan? Thanks to you for the gift of this book, and thank you to the team that put it together. I'd like to thank our studio audience and our online audience for joining us today. And if you'd like to learn more about talent intelligence, visit us at taleo.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pamela, and Taleo.